All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're really glad that you joined us today. We're expecting a great turnout. We see some people are still getting on, but we've got a lot to talk about, so we want to get started so that we can use our time, and we appreciate you being on. My name is Doug Scott. I'm with the Great Plains Institute, and the Great Plains Institute, as you can see from the slide, is one of the sponsors for this webinar that's exploring the evolving technology landscape for gas-fired electricity generation. If you want to take a look at the agenda. Thank you. So we're going to do this brief review of the agenda and a brief introduction, tell you a little bit about the groups that are hosting this today. And then we're going to hear a couple of presentations. We've got a terrific agenda and some great speakers for you today. We will hear first from EPA and from DOE. EPA will talk about how they are thinking about gas technologies in the context of upcoming rulemakings. And then we'll hear from DOE and how they've been working to advance low and zero emission technologies. And then following that, we will have a panel of 3 industry speakers who will describe technologies and fuels they are deploying or plan to deploy. So I think that we'll cover this from a few different angles, and we look forward to not only all of the presentations, but also to your questions. There's a Q&A function in the down on the bottom of your screen. So if you want to put your questions in there, we will monitor those. We won't take any questions after the first 2 presentations, but then when we come back, the representatives from EPA and DOE will rejoin the panelists, and then we'll have a Q&A session with us asking questions, and then with taking your questions as well. So we really look forward to this presentations and to the discussion that we have today. If we go to the next slide, please. The host for this webinar is what's called the Conveners Network, and the Conveners Network, you know, as the name would imply, is made up of several groups that convene groups of states. The Conveners Network is the Center for the New Energy Economy at Colorado State University, the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions at Duke University, the Great Plains Institute, and the Harvard Law School for Environmental and Energy Law Project. We work with state officials and stakeholders on issues of clean energy and climate change, and the coverage for this group is pretty much most of the country. So a lot of states that are represented by convenings that are done by members of the Conveners Network. And so we thought that it would be a great opportunity to get together and to talk about gas technology and how that's evolving and where we think that that's going to go in the future. So with that, let me turn right to the program here, and first tell you it's my pleasure to introduce Nick Hudson. Dr. Nick Hudson is the group leader of energy strategies at the U.S. EPA Office of Air Quality Performance and Standards. Dr. Hudson manages this group at the EPA office. His group is responsible for developing standards for power plants under Section 111 of the Clean Air Act, including those for new gas combustion turbines and those for existing turbines. Nick's group also developed the gas technology white paper that EPA is currently taking comments on. And we're really glad that Dr. Hudson is with us today. So Nick, please take it away, and thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm really pleased to be here. So I'm going to talk today about, just very briefly, about some of the things that we've got going on with respect to gas generating technology. And as Doug mentioned, we always separate the way we look at these generating sources depending on whether they're new or existing sources. And this, what I'll talk about today, is really very focused on new gas-fired stationary combustion turbines, or actually, fossil fuel-fired stationary combustion turbines. Next slide, please. So the first thing I'll note is that we recently, just a couple of months ago, released a white paper that was sort of a high-level summary of some greenhouse gas mitigation options for new stationary combustion turbines. We were really interested in putting this out to begin a dialogue and to get some feedback from the regulated community, the technology, the general public, et cetera. This white paper was intended to put down and put out for comment our view of the current state of the art for combustion turbine technologies and opportunities for to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from those, and again from new sources. Specifically, we addressed in this white paper efficiency improvements or improvements that have happened over time. There's been a lot of improvements recently, and the new combustion turbines that are available on the market are perform better than those even 10 years ago. And then we also bring up options of co-firing natural gas with alternative fuels, and we talk a lot about hydrogen, but there are other fuels that can be co-fired as well, biogas, et cetera. We talk about the status of carbon capture technology and the state of that, including cost and performance. And then we talk a little bit more about some other topics, such as co-locating new combustion turbines with energy storage options. We talk about upstream emissions of natural gas in the production of the natural gas, and how that might be factored into emission reductions at the generating source. Next slide. So importantly, the white paper, does not set policy. It doesn't establish any performance standards. There's nothing binding associated with that. It was really meant to, again, sort of initiate a dialogue with respect to the state of the art of combustion turbines and opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from new turbines. We think it's, however, importantly as well, we do think that it will help to inform future rulemaking efforts, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute, and also serve as a resource for states and other stakeholders to have a white paper or some sort of reference that they can use when they're evaluating, for example, back determinations or other evaluations looking at the best available technology. And then again, to broader conversation about the future of natural gas-fired generating sources. So there's a link here. You can go to this to read the white paper. I think you could probably, with pretty quickly, Google and find the white paper. There are instructions there on the EPA website on how to submit comments. We're accepting comments into a non-regulatory docket, so there's instructions on how you would do that. The public comment period goes through June 6th, so we're expecting in the next few days to get some good comments from readers. So next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, part of our motivation for putting out this white paper was to sort of educate ourselves on options for review of the new source performance standards that regulate the emissions of greenhouse gases from new stationary combustion turbines. We promulgated the standards that are currently in effect in 2015. That's 40 CFR Part 60 Subpart Quad T. So it regulates the performance of new stationary combustion turbines, subcategorized by baseload combustion turbines and non-baseload combustion turbines. we didn't want to, we initially considered doing it by, simple cycle versus combined cycle, but ultimately decided to subcategorize by the function of the turbines. The baseload emission standard is 1,000 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. I think everyone would agree that that's not really a very stringent or technology forcing standard. It's something that we're reevaluating. And then the non-baseload performance standard is really just a requirement to utilize clean fuels. So natural gas or blends with fuel oil. So we were directed under Executive Order 13990 to revisit this this standard, but also we have a statutory obligation that at least every 8 years we review new source performance standards. So so we have different obligations to do that. So we're reviewing these standards now, and we're very interested in again, what sort of options that are out there, what the cost and performance of those options are. But in addition to that, the next slide, please. We're also very interested in the future of use of combustion turbines, and we very sort of conveniently separated the turbines into non-base load versus base load. But there are some turbines that operate more in kind of an intermediate load region where they're not being used exclusively as either baseload units or peaking units. And so we're very interested in investment decisions that developers and utilities are making moving forward, and how they anticipate to use those turbines in the future, and whether or not they would be more focused on combined cycle baseload turbines, or more toward simple cycle turbines that are used for peaking purposes or to back up renewables. So that's the kind of information that we're very interested in hearing about, and hopefully folks will take the time to read this white paper, provide comments, but also that we have opportunities to hear from the stakeholders regarding what is the future of use of these turbines, and whether maybe there are regional differences in the use of combustion turbines moving forward. Regions of the country that may have more renewables versus those that don't have that same opportunity. So I'll stop there, and hopefully this generates some conversation later.
Great. Thanks very much, Nick. It generated a couple of questions for me, but I'll hold off till we get to that point in the program. But thank you very much. I really appreciate you being with us. Let me turn now to Lynn Brickett. Lynn is the director for the Point Source Carbon Capture Program at US DOE in the Carbon Management Office. Her career is focused on environmental issues associated with fossil-fired power plants, including emissions of nitrogen oxides, mercury, and carbon dioxide. And again, Lynn, thank you very much for being with us. We look forward to your remarks. We'll turn it over to you. Lynn, are you there?
Doug, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Can't see you, but we can hear you.
Sorry about this. It says the host has my camera stopped. I don't know what that means, but okay. I'm not going to waste time. I don't have a lot of time. So I'm just going to jump into it. I actually don't have slides, so you can just look at that horrible picture, everybody. Apologies. Anyways, thanks for the invite today, Nick. Nice seeing you as always. I was asked to speak to several things: carbon capture, hydrogen, and just in general decarbonation of our natural gas system. And so I want to start with a little bit of background. We've been working in this space for quite a long time, over 20 years, actually. DOE, the Office of Fossil Energy back then, and now the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, started working in CCS, carbon capture and storage. And those two programs, the storage program as well as the capture program, were started at the same time, right around the year 2000. Interestingly, as time has gone on, we as the department has funded more in storage early on because we've realized, in order to really get the amount of storage that we would need to see wide-scale deployment of CCS, we would need to get a lot of storage sources. And so a lot of money went into storage early and much less in capture. And then over the years, that number has kind of switched, and capture, since probably the 2015 timeframe, has been the largest funded single program that we have had in the office. And speaking of the funding level, just to put this in perspective, because I am going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure law at the very end of my talk. And, I know when people hear about the infrastructure and CCS especially, they understand it's billions of dollars, multiple billions of dollars, which is quite exciting. But I don't want it to be lost on this group that, our annual appropriated budget just from capture alone over the last 6 years has been over $750 million. And so when you look at the integrated kind of the storage and the conversion and everything, we're talking about being more like over $1.5 billion. So it's great when we get these very large influxes of funding, but really the day-to-day work is done each and every fiscal year as we work with our annual appropriations. So historically, when we started back in the 2000s that I mentioned, we were working on coal. Coal was kind of our mission, and why would that be? Obviously, this group understands it's coal because coal has has double the footprint of CO2 emissions than equal natural gas does. And also back then, if we thinking about it, our power, when we looked at the grid, the majority of our power was actually coming from coal-based systems. And as it was discussed earlier in the introduction, we know that in the last 5 years, especially, we've seen a rapid change to natural gas systems. And we understand, as Nick was talking about in the white paper, that in the future, as the grid gets more and more decarbonized, we anticipate that we will be seeing even more natural gas. Although, the form of that natural gas will likely change. It may change from base load or near base load NGCC systems to much more simple cycle boilers. But with that change, the department also changed. And about, I think probably like in 2017 was when we first did some of our first natural gas work. Now, obviously, the good news about having done so much capture on coal and moving to natural gas is in many ways, it's actually easier to move to natural gas. You don't have the pollutants to really worry about. You don't have the contaminants that can harm your solvent or your sorbent systems. However, there are other challenges. For instance, we know natural gas systems tend to have more oxygen. And when you're looking explicitly at solvent systems tend to suffer, many of the immune systems can suffer from oxidative degradation. So this is one of the challenges that we had to look at when looking at natural gas from coal. Not all of our technologies, made the move successfully. We had to develop some new technologies. Similarly, the program moved into industrial, and industrial is more recent than natural gas. And so industrial, we've probably been doing industrial work for about 4 years, and that's really where hydrogen comes to play. And so in hydrogen, within the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, that is actually a bifurcated program. In my program, the Point Source Carbon Capture program, we are looking at hydrogen from the perspective of SMRs and ATRs, so autothermal reformers or steam methane reformers, and putting post-combustion or pre-combustion carbon capture on the back end. However, we do hydrogen work from the gasification perspective too, biomass gasification to hydrogen. But again, the key for our office, and DOE is a big organization, and I'm only representing the views of the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. But the key from our office is we are looking at blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, of course, is also being developed by the department, but that's being developed by the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. So speaking to hydrogen specifically and some of the things we've done recently, we have 2 years ago, we put out pre-FEED studies on both existing SMRs as well as new ATRs. And just to to back up for a minute, in case the audience isn't completely familiar, ATRs are not something that people think about a lot or have not really previously thought about a lot with regards to hydrogen. And the ATR system, unless you're in a carbon constrained world, you would really use the steam methane reformer, which is why we have so much installed capacity of steam methane reformers across the United States and really around the world. And it's the way we make the majority of our hydrogen today, our blue hydrogen today. However, in a carbon constrained world, autothermal reformers for hydrogen production really make a lot of sense, because they do produce CO2 at a much more concentrated and under pressure. So it makes the dollar per ton of capture of CO2 from an ATR better. Now, of course, and lower. Of course, the Achilles heel of ATR has to do with the fact that you need an air separation unit with an ATR, whereas you don't need that with an SMR. But again, it looks like from all perspectives that SMRs likely we will not see new build SMRs in the future. So our program is targeting, we did pre-feasibility of retrofit of SMR systems to capture the CO2 and make a very low CI or low carbon intensity hydrogen. And then we also looked at new ATRs, autothermal reformers, not a retrofit, but new ones that are being proposed by companies like Air Products, and there's a company in North Dakota called Bakken Energy. People are proposing to build these and produce hydrogen. So that's where we are in the hydrogen space in the appropriated program. And I will talk more about hydrogen shortly on the infrastructure. So really the key thing for us, whether it's gas or coal or even industry and carbon capture, we're looking to lower the cost. The cost of capture is by far the largest in the CCS value chain. It is by far the largest proportional cost. And it's a challenge because, Nick and I, having come from other things, before we got on with the larger audience, we were talking amongst ourselves, and we've seen mercury and we've seen NOx and SOx and particulate and worked in those areas. And because of the sheer volume of CO2 that we have to remove from these systems, whether they be power or whether they be industrial, these are very costly projects. And therefore, the cost is always, for 20 years, has been our target. And we've made actually a lot of inroads in reducing the cost of carbon capture systems, mostly on the OpEx side. So we've developed a lot of advanced materials that do better, that have lower sensible heat requirements, that are just cheaper, that have higher capture efficiencies. And the CapEx side, we're working hard on that, but that in itself is a challenge. However, we can appreciate the fact that when we actually build these systems at scale, we can get learning by doing. And I think we're going to see CapEx improvements on the learning by doing, very similar to how we've seen that with FGD systems, for instance. So cost reductions is a primary focus. I did want to, I don't have a lot of time, but I did want to just speak about infrastructure because it really touches all of the points that I was asked to speak to today. And so under the infrastructure bill, there are lots of provisions that touch FECM. And some of those provisions that I want to hit on, the one is the hydrogen hub, and it is the largest provision. It's $12 billion. And that provision speaks to 4 hubs. And it speaks to specifically, there's very prescriptive language. There is to be a hub that's based on nuclear. There's to be a hub that's based on renewable energy. There's to be a fossil-based hub, and then there's a 4th hub. And so the fossil-based hub, again, is where my office would work on, and that has to likely do with SMR, HR, even gasification, whereas renewables are green hydrogen. And I'm sure the audience understands that we have a hydrogen shot. DOE put this hydrogen shot out an earth shot, and we want to get, the goal of that is to get to 1 kilogram of hydrogen for $1 in 1 decade. So 111. That dollar is really challenging. It's less challenging for green hydrogen, I'm sorry, for blue hydrogen. But again, when you're putting a capture system on, you're adding cost to that. And very challenging for green hydrogen, as those systems really need to scale up, and they need to have some of the learnings by doings and cost reductions that I talked about earlier that will apply to capture systems. Similarly, under the infrastructure, there are provisions with regards to carbon capture, which is the area that I'm working in. And so specifically, there is $2.5 billion for integrated CCS demos. And very prescriptive language for those provisions as well. And those provisions call for 2 of these integrated systems on coal-fired power, 2 on natural gas-fired power, and then 2 for industrial. What really makes these integrated systems and these demo systems so nice relative to the appropriated program is they're not stovepipes, so you're getting integrated operations. This would be the equivalent of the ADM Archer Daniels Midland ethanol project that we funded, or the Petronova project that we funded, or the Port Arthur hydrogen project. So those were previous demos that we did under ARA funding, and these are now demos that I'm talking about under the bipartisan infrastructure law. Another one is there's just slightly under $1 billion for large carbon capture pilots. And so these, again, say they should be applied for coal and they should be applied for natural gas. So in the appropriated program, and what we've done in the capture program for years, is we have a multi-TRL program. We range from TRL 3, Technology Readiness Level 3, all the way to Technology Readiness Level 7. And through that, we start at very early bench scale work, and we go all the way up to what we call large pilots. So in our vernacular, we do small pilot projects. That's about nominally a 1 megawatt electric at a coal plant. And we do large pilots, which can be 10 to 25 megawatts. And these large pilots, as envisioned by the bipartisan bill that would be just slightly under $1 billion, they would be even larger. And so, as you can see, in the carbon capture program through DOE, we really have tried to cover all of the bases. It's very exciting to have the bipartisan law now, because we're ready to do some more demos, which will help getting to those CapEx reductions that I mentioned earlier. I think I'm probably at time, so thanks, and looking forward to any questions.
Thanks so much, Lynn. Great information. There was certainly a lot there to think about and to ask about as we go forward. And I think it's really a great lead-in and to the industry panel that's coming up, and talk about what some of the private companies are doing. So we did get a request in the Q&A that for all of our speakers, if you could try to not to use the acronyms, or if you do use them, explain them. And I realize we're in an acronym heavy business here, but just going forward, if you have the opportunity and think about it, if you could just spell out what the acronyms mean. But thanks, Lynn, and thanks Nick. That was a great lead in. So now we're going to turn to our panel, and again, we've got an industry panel. You can see the folks who are going to speak on that panel, and I'll turn it over to Dale Brick. Dale leads the state and regional climate work for the Harvard Environmental and Energy Law Project at Harvard Law School. Dale is also one of the organizers of the Conveners Network, and she is going to take us through the panel. So Dale, thanks for being with us, and take it away.
Thanks, Doug. We are thrilled to have 3 speakers today talking about the latest in technologies that can help us decarbonize the electric sector. So we have Damien Beauchamp. He is the President and Chief Development Officer for 8 Rivers, a driving force behind NetPower, which you may have heard about and not completely understand. So he will help us do that. Also, Jeff Ling, Area Vice President from Xcel Energy, to talk about the technologies that they're looking at to meet their own mid-century carbon reduction goals, as well as, of course, the goals that they'll need to meet because of their state and federal regulators. And finally, James Hennahan, Senior Vice President for Calpine, to give us a dive into CCS and the other decarbonization strategies and technologies that Calpine has on their radar. So as Doug said, we'll go into questions and discussion with everybody after we get the latest from these three. And with that, I will turn it over to Damien.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. Apologies if I go on mute for moments and coughing fits. I'm currently quarantined in South Korea with COVID. So it's 3:30 in the morning here, but you know, the fight for climate change doesn't stop here at 8 Rivers. We were founded in 2008. And we currently have a platform. I don't know if I can control the slides, but we go to the next slide. We've developed an entire platform of carbon capture-based solutions, or we like to refer to as net zero solutions, across all sectors, be it electricity generation through the advent of the Allam-Fetvedt Cycle, which is the platform upon which NetPower is based. When fired with natural gas. We also have a solid fuels variant of the Allam-Fetvedt cycle. We do direct air capture, and we have a portfolio of 4 technologies in that space. We look at CO2 to products, and our increasing focus has been on industrial heat lately, zero emissions industrial heat, as well as hydrogen generation for the production of ammonia, methanol, and the refining industry, so where the existing hydrogen industry is today. If we could go to the next slide. So this kind of gives you a snapshot of 8 Rivers as a company. We've got 2 sides to our organization. One side is the technology development portfolio side, and this is all technology we've developed in-house, invented with our team, and then went out to the market and found various partners. So NetPower was touched on. Other co-owners of NetPower, Constellation, Oxy Low Carbon Ventures, and most recently Baker Hughes made an investment into NetPower just after NetPower synchronized to the grid system down in Texas that it's connected to, and that grid's called ERCOT. And then recently, and I believe it was through the Carbon Management Office at DOE, our ADER H2 technology was awarded some pre-feed funding with partners Technip, the Wyoming Energy Authority, and North Shore Energy, where we're doing a pre-feed of a blue hydrogen production system in Wyoming. We've developed sour gas processing technology with the group out of Japan by the name of Toyo. And most recently, we were inducted into the Carbon Removal X Prize, winning the first down selection of Elon Musk's $100 million funded Carbon Removal X Prize. And we've partnered with Los Alamos, MIT through that effort. We also have other technologies like 8 Rivers Energy, which is the Allam cycle. So it's the NetPower system, but when fueled by solid fuels like biomass or coal. As well as carbonate, which is a way to reduce emissions associated with limestone or quicklime and cement production. On the other side, we have our net zero solutions project development business, and that's where we have currently 3 projects being developed that have been publicly announced. Whitetail in the UK with SemCorp, this will deploy a 280 megawatt to 300 megawatt electric net power facility on SemCorp's industrial site as part of the East Coast cluster. Coyote Clean Power on the Southern Ute Indian Reservation will produce 280 megawatts of electricity using a net power system, partnering with the Southern Ute Growth Fund and others in the region. We're really hoping for more support from local utilities who are going to need stable baseload zero emissions power. We think that this particular project is very well suited both from a clean energy and an inclusion and diversity perspective, i.e. including underserved and diverse nations in the energy transition. We think is very important, and this is part of our ESG platform at 8 Rivers. Broadway Clean Energy, is in Decatur, Illinois. That's going to deploy a 280 megawatt electric NetPower facility as well, along with zero emission steam for the industrial purposes of that site. That site is particularly attractive because it's the only Class 6 well in the United States. You know, Lynn touched on the fact that DOE focused on storage before capture. I will say that with only one storage site, Class 6 well permitted in the United States today, it's extremely hard to scale CCUS the way it needs to be scaled. And so a real focus needs to be put on, and I think the EPA being here is a great addition, needs to be focused on how do we accelerate and permit more Class 6 wells faster. That is the primary limitation today in the United States. I think the DOE has certainly done a wonderful job in supporting technology development, and that technology development is very much ready for commercial prime time. Through all of the partners we've established in many of our subsidiaries and portfolio companies, we've also recently garnered investment from JX Nippon. They're significant. They were the ones who did Petronova, one of the partners on Petronova. And they've invested in 8 Rivers as they look to us as being their strategic net zero solutions deployment partner. Their strategy starts in the United States, and we're working with them to find sites and other projects that are currently under development but have not been announced yet. More to come on that. And then soon after JX invested, SK Group, the second largest conglomerate out of Korea, invested $100 million in March into 8 Rivers for establishing a Asian joint venture where we will deploy our technologies throughout Asia. Next slide, please. This just touches on the recent announcement, and this is why I'm over in Korea at the moment. And unfortunately, sometime between leaving and arriving, got COVID. So here I sit till June 11. Next slide, please. Next. And so I thought it was really great when Lynn touched on ATR technology. So I mentioned the pre-feed that we're entering into with Technip, North Shore Energy, and the Wyoming Energy Authority. Also, we recently signed an agreement with Johnson Matthey to collaborate on using their ATR technology at the center of the ATR-H2 blue hydrogen production system. So ATR-H2 produces hydrogen from natural gas while capturing 99% of the emissions, including CO2. We also, in addition to the autothermal reformer, the ATR, we use a gas heated reformer and recuperate as much heat as we possibly can. We also maximize hydrogen recovery. And so we're able to achieve simultaneous high carbon capture, very high carbon capture rates, while also very high energy conversion efficiency rates, that being methane to hydrogen conversion. We're currently looking to deploy this all throughout the world. We've done some engineering studies already with very reputable groups in Australia and other places. We're currently in the process of selecting sites within the United States for the production of 100 million scuff to 200 million scuff per day worth of hydrogen projects to feed ammonia synthesis. That ammonia will be off-took by SK and JX and other groups out of Japan for co-firing with coal fleets in their countries where they don't have suitable sequestration access. They will produce a zero carbon based fuel in the United States, sequester that CO2 and offtake that ammonia product. They believe that our ATR-H2 technology is a best in class solution for producing that ammonia at high efficiency and low cost with near zero emissions. And so we're currently in a site selection process outside of the Wyoming project, which is where we're doing our pre-feed, but along the Gulf Coast and West Coast of North America. Next slide, please. In addition, we hope to announce soon efforts moving into 8 Rivers Energy, which is the Allam-Fetvedt Cycle based on biomass, so negative emissions based power generation, both here in the United States and other locations around the world. This kind of sits within our negative emissions portfolio at 8 Rivers, and we hope to be making an announcement with a very reputable partner in this space soon. And, you know, we look at doing everything from generating power from the biomass to also bleeding off and separating some of the hydrogen that's generated in the syngas, because ultimately syngas is what's put into the power generation cycle. And we can pull off some of that hydrogen and produce negative emissions hydrogen for various industrial applications. The first industrial applications we focus on are existing consumers of hydrogen, those being ammonia and petrochemical industries. And studies that we've done show that directly firing hydrogen doesn't quite make sense yet from an economics perspective, but using it in other value-added commodities certainly does make sense. Next slide, please. In addition, I just wanted to point out, based on our carbon capture expertise that's been developed since 2008, when everybody was confused about why we were so focused on this area so much, we've been able to transition that expertise into, we think, what is a best-in-class direct air capture solution. Our solution looks to minimize CapEx and OpEx by increasing the simplicity of the system, reducing moving parts, and maximizing surface area. And that technology has now been reviewed by the Carbon X Prize, the Carbon Removal X Prize, and has been down selected for that. Next slide, please. Next slide. So these are the projects that are based on the Allam-Fetvedt Cycle, the NetPower system. This first one, Coyote Clean Power, is based on the Southern Ute Indian Reservation. And before I go into this too much, just to take everybody through how the Allam-Fetvedt Cycle works. The Allam-Fetvedt Cycle is an oxy-combustion, so it burns pure oxygen and natural gas, thereby producing a very pure stream of CO2 and steam. And that steam can be condensed out, leaving a very pure stream of CO2. Now, you do need an air separation unit, but because of the high gross turbine efficiency, the system can support the parasitic load of an air separation unit at 64 megawatts of additional electrical parasitic load and still be competitive on a net electrical generation basis. So we combust the natural gas in oxygen, and that is then put through a turbine and a series of heat exchangers in the NetPower system. And that CO2 is recycled, recompressed, pumped back up to pressure, put back through the combustor, where the CO2 is then mixed with the oxygen, the natural gas, and it kind of gets reheated in that combustion process, and then goes back through the turbine. And we're continuously recycling a very pure stream of CO2 in the Allam-Fetvedt cycle. And that is what is unique. The other thing I would say that is unique about many of 8 Rivers technologies, similar to the Allam-Fetvedt cycle, is that we do not use adsorbents. We do not use adsorbents or absorbents. The CO2 is inherently produced at high purity, and we capture it as a pure gas. It's one of the key reasons that the SK Group invested in 8 Rivers, is because of the philosophy we've taken on carbon capture to not use adsorbents. Many of our technologies are new build, they are not retrofit. The Allam-Fetvedt cycle does not retrofit existing gensets. It is a new build technology. This technology is extremely exciting in this project because we're going to have access to naturally venting methane that we can feed into this system to generate negative emissions power. If successful in that process, which the Southern Ute have already been successful in capturing emissions on their outcrop and putting them into processing units, we would be negative 1/3 ton for every megawatt hour we generate from this project, with an IRR hovering between 15 and 24%, depending on your assumptions and power price. But given the average power prices in the region are increasing more and more due to retiring coal plants, we think that this solution is going to be very economically competitive as well as environmentally competitive. Next slide. Broadway is being developed in Decatur, Illinois, atop an existing Class 6 well. We'll also be doing zero emission steam. The funding partner on this is Warwick Capital Partners. Very similar system to what I just mentioned. The only difference is that we've used our oxy heater, our oxy combustion heater, to produce steam instead of power in a separate cycle to be able to eliminate the coal steam generation units that are currently on site. Next slide, please. And then this is an exciting one. Many clusters have been developed in the UK. The East Coast cluster is one that 8 Rivers and Sembcorp are a part of through Whitetail Clean Energy. This is going to be built upon a brownfield site on Sembcorp's industrial complex and is going to serve many of their tenants with zero emissions power. This is currently gone through a pre-feed and we're working through the phase 2 process with the government, which would give us a dispatchable power agreement, a DPA, which would basically, the way it really translates is it gives us a very stable and sure price for our power, where when the unit is offline, the project is still getting paid through a government subsidy to support it. The CO2 sequestration will be offshore and is being developed by a whole host of oil and gas companies that operate in the region. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate listening through that. And I'm happy to field any questions that you all may have.
Damien, thank you so much. I think you are going way above and beyond the call of duty with everything you're grappling with over there. So thank you so much for still joining us. Let me just give you one clarifying question, and then we'll pull you back for the the more substantive discussion in a few minutes. But on the, when you're using biomass as a fuel in the projects that you're actually doing, can you tell us what the feedstock is for that?
It's anywhere, some projects are just woody-based biomass, so wood chips and pellets. And in other instances, we're also looking at municipal solid waste. What's interesting about the Allam-Fetvedt cycle is that it's fairly independent of the Wabi index of the fuel source. So because you're blending CO2 into your fuel prior to combustion, we can simply, based on, because when you're doing biomass, you can get a real variation in your Wabi index, which is basically the heating content of your fuel source. And this can cause problems. But because in the Allam-Fetvedt cycle, we blend CO2 in with that fuel source, we can actually synthetically control the Wabi index of the fuel. So where we see variability in the feedstock coming into our system, we can simply throttle the amount of CO2 we dilute or don't dilute into the syngas. And so we can get very stable operations from a whole variety of biomass sources. But in most cases, it's woody biomass, wood chips, and then pellets, as well as municipal solid waste, which could be quite variable.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Okay, Jeff, you're up next. And so are your slides. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Dale. Really appreciate the opportunity to join you all. And Alyssa, we can go to the next slide here. Just to set a little bit of context, Xcel Energy is a dual fuel utility. We serve 3.6 million electric customers and 2.2 million natural gas customers in 8 states, from the upper Midwest, Colorado, Eastern New Mexico, and the Texas Panhandle. And I think for context in this conversation, what's really important to us is that we were the first major US energy provider to establish comprehensive goals across 3 sectors of the economy: the power sector, natural gas use in buildings, and the transportation sector. So these are the 3 components of how we approach really every conversation, and certainly this one with regard to new technology. If we go to the next slide, Alyssa, we made an announcement in November of last year specific to our natural gas business. And it's really a commitment around net zero emissions for both methane and customer carbon dioxide emissions. And I'm showing it to you, and it's relevant to this conversation because of the commitment around certified low methane natural gas purchases. We're making that commitment not only for natural gas distribution use and direct burn in buildings, but also for power generation. And in this way, what we think we can do is really leverage our buying power to source the lowest methane emissions gas possible. I think Nick mentioned this really with regard to the white paper. It's something that we're starting. We have a few pilots in market already and transitioning exclusively to that type of purchase in the next 7.5 years. Next slide. The transition on the electric side of the business has really been significant. And this is an overview of our percentage of carbon-free generation. I'll just give you some highlights that we have plans to be out of coal by 2030 in the upper Midwest and by 2031 in Colorado. So a significant decrease in emissions associated with that transition. Think current technology through 2030. An important role for natural gas, an important role for renewables, as much as 10 gigawatts additional on our system, maybe as much as 11 gigawatts. Strategic electrification, preserving nuclear in the upper Midwest, big investments in the grid, energy efficiency, current stuff, current technology that we know today, but really driving a very significant emissions reduction by 2030. If we go to the next slide, we know today, though, that we will need some forms of new technology. And of course, this is a conversation about gas technology, but I wanted to point out that we've been hard at work with a number of industry partners, our industry association, EEI, and also the Great Plains Institute, one of the conveners in this network, over the last 2 years to really build the case in Congress that we need some new forms of 24/7 dispatchable power to get to zero or get to net zero. And so this coalition, which remains in place, I think has been very successful in building the case in Congress for this need, ultimately very much a success of passing the IIJA bill and the $62 billion that DOE has today, but also a focus on some of these other technologies that we might not talk about in this conversation: advanced nuclear, zero carbon fuels, advanced renewables, et cetera. Really, technology and the availability of technology is going to drive the timeline to a 100% clean future. And so these groups are working together to try to pull those new technologies into the marketplace, late 2020s, early 2030s, really when the EEI member companies think they'll need them as part of their resource plans. So I just want to underscore this, that when we talk about new technology, it's that dispatchability or 24/7 and non-weather dependent, carbon-free, and it's really a portfolio of technology options that we're trying to pursue in addition to zero carbon fuels that I'll talk about today. You go to the next slide, please. And we really need, in the absence of those technologies, something that is fully dispatchable and non-weather dependent today. And this is just a snapshot from 3 years ago, a 2-week period in the winter in our upper Midwest system. And you really get a sense of the need for a dispatchable resource when we have intermittent loads that are not available. Wind and solar, a pretty big gap here in this case with our net load. This is an important role for a dispatchable resource like natural gas. In terms of our state resource plans to really address these balanced portfolios, and if you go to the next slide, Alyssa, I want to talk specifically about natural gas, maybe come back to some of the points that Nick was mentioning at the top. So the top line on our resource plans, both in the upper Midwest and in Colorado, is, as I mentioned, retiring coal by 2030 and 2031 in Colorado, 10 gigawatts of renewables. Those are really significantly driving the carbon transition. And importantly, what our modeling is showing is that some new gas resources are going to be needed to enable that amount of intermittent renewable energy. And they'll cause a very low amount of greenhouse gas emissions because of the capacity factors that we're showing. And so I think this is on the lower end of the chart that Nick showed, really a 5 to 12% capacity factor range through 2030, which is very, very low combustion turbine operating hours. And you see at right an example from the Colorado Clean Energy Plan, testimony from the Clean Energy Plan, the fraction of emissions, that small blue line, a couple 100,000 tons, that represents emissions from those new combustion turbines. So I'll just say that we did present plans to our state regulators that constrained new natural gas, and those were not the plans that were presented, or rather, plans were presented to the regulators, and those were not the plans that were chosen. So a small and prudent amount of natural gas really maintains affordability and reliability of the portfolios, and that's what we saw both in the upper Midwest and in Colorado. We talk about hydrogen-capable turbines. If you go to the next slide, Alyssa. Right now, for our system, as I mentioned, gas-fired combustion turbines are really the most efficient and economical resource. And we've started and launched a new clean fuels division within the company that's looking at things like renewable natural gas, but also hydrogen. And how can we blend hydrogen into some of these new builds? Leading manufacturers, as the white paper talked about, really capable of integrating up to 30% blend today, with a stair-step function of 100% capable by 2030, whether that's Mitsubishi or GE or Siemens, really all have a commitment around this type of transition. And so it's also going to take, importantly, and Lynn talked about this, significant public policy yet to come. I think the hydrogen hub grants are important. A dedicated hydrogen production tax credit, that $1 per kilogram that Lynn talked about, is really vital. And obviously declines in the cost of electrolyzers will be needed. So what we are proposing to do in Colorado and Minnesota is really, through our procurement process, encourage bids in Colorado that include both hydrogen capable and non-hydrogen capable new combustion turbines. In Minnesota, we've been a little bit more explicit about where some of these turbines would go in Lyon County, Minnesota, and in North Dakota, and specifically modeling them as hydrogen capable. But again, we've not gone through the solicitation process. It's something that's still yet to come. So a new clean fuels division within the company really focused on these issues and how do we, again, pull these new technologies into the marketplace, into our resource plans. Finally, just a note on public policy, if you go to the last one, please, and considerations around power sector rules that may be down the future, rapid response units are going to be really critical. And perhaps it's a subcategorization, like what Nick talked about, distinguishing between CTs and CCs. And again, for us, very, very low capacity factors for new turbines needed to integrate significant amounts of renewables. Really, we're doubling the amount of renewable capacity on our system between now and 2030. No question that hydrogen capable combustion needs to be part of the allowable approaches that accommodates these blending increases, the stair-step functions that might occur between 30% and 100%. We think that's very much a viable technology option. And combined cycle units really are, operating more so in the base load side of Nick's chart, I think, and really important for the flexibility and load carrying capacity that they bring, especially as the grid is electrifying more sectors of our economy. We're bringing in the transportation sector, we're bringing in the building sector. So that's more work for the power sector to take on, and a really important role for existing combined cycle units. And finally, the realities of reliability and market requirements. Owners of new gas turbines may need to dispatch those units due to economic or other reliability requirements. So some sort of safety valve, if you will, to any restrictions around new gas turbines is going to be really critical. And I think reliability is top of mind for many of us and really needs to be evergreen in any new policy development. So that's what I've got for the afternoon discussion. Really looking forward to the questions, Dale.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate that you gave that sort of larger context of everything, not just the power sector, because gas and all of these technologies have play in lots of different sectors. And many of us and many people on the call, I'm sure, are thinking about those other things as well. So we may have to have a whole nother conversation and discussion to cover the full suite of what you had, but it's good to have it out there for context. So thanks. And now we'll turn over to James.
Great. Thanks, Dale. Thanks everybody for joining. Good afternoon. I'd like to start my discussion or my talk a little bit with the discussion of Calpine and give you a brief overview for those that aren't familiar. Maybe can we flip to the next slide? So for a quick overview of Calpine, so we're the largest producer of electricity from natural gas in the United States and the largest producer of electricity from geothermal resources in the world. We've got about 26,000 megawatts that we have roughly evenly divided between our three strategic regions, the East, West, and Central regions. We produce about 100 million megawatt hours per year, and we have retail subsidiaries that sell about 2/3 of that to our retail customers of all sizes. Of our fleet, we've got 76 plants. 13 of those plants are geothermal. The remaining 63 are all natural gas fired. And of those 63 natural gas fired plants, 37 are combined cycle. So our technology breakdown is also in the lower right corner. Next slide. So I wanted to cover just kind of a couple of our key messages. So since our founding in 1984, Calpine has been an industry leader in environmental and carbon policy. In fact, first megawatts that were part of Calpine were actually geothermal megawatts out in California. But as we continue to evolve and support this energy transition, we've been spending significant resources, particularly, I would say in the last 5 years or so, to evaluate the economics of different methods of decarbonizing our fleet. With that effort, we've concluded that post-combustion carbon capture at today's technology level and today's economics is the most economic method to decarbonize natural gas generation. And I'll walk you through a little bit of analysis that led us to that point. That being said, subsidies can certainly change that, right? So subsidies like a production tax credit for hydrogen, increase 45Q, all these things can kind of put their finger on the scale and change what is the most economic. But based on the merits of the technology, carbon capture is clearly the winner at today's cost. Now, that being said, we've certainly been looking at hydrogen and are prepared to continue or to start burning hydrogen if that becomes more economic. Next slide, please. So, like I said, we spent a lot of time evaluating the economics of various technologies for decarbonizing our fleet. And this slide shows an overview of one of the analyses that we did with the help of Boston Consulting Group, BCG, to really look at decarbonizing our existing fleet and what would be the cost on a dollar per ton basis. So to do this analysis, we took a kind of a generic combined cycle unit that runs about 50% capacity factor at about a 50% efficiency. So kind of a middle of the road, early 2000s combined cycle unit. And then said, okay, if we're going to replace that combined cycle, if we're going to reduce carbon from that combined cycle or replace it with an alternate technology, we take all the costs of that change divided by all the carbon that we reduced and then put everything on a levelized dollar per ton of carbon basis for that change. So we've stacked these in order of economics. So all the way to the left, as I noted, is a post-combustion carbon capture, really amine-based capture, with today's commercial technology. And that's about $80 to $160 per metric ton, depending on your capacity factor and the region of the country. Beyond that, we looked at a few different fuel types, right? So just fuel substitution, biogas, hydrogen, other synthetic fuels, and thought, well, what if we were to burn alternate fuels? Hydrogen we can burn up to 30% in most of our units today. Potentially get to 100% eventually. What would be the incremental cost of the fuel divided by the carbon that we would abate by burning that fuel? And as you can see, these ranges are anywhere from $120 for biogas at the low end to $600 for green hydrogen at the high end. On the hydrogen, maybe one of the complicating factors is whether we're buying this hydrogen kind of on demand at the producer's cost, or whether we need to store that hydrogen to kind of fill in gaps or to balance supply and demand over longer periods of time. So the green box there represents our storage sensitivity to what is the cost. The low end is what if we're able to buy just when we want it? And then the high end is, hey, what if we really need to think through storage and so that we can have the hydrogen available when we absolutely need it. Other technologies that we considered are long duration batteries like flow batteries, nuclear, and an overbuild of solar and storage resources to the extent that they would achieve the same level of reliability as we currently have with a natural gas unit. Now, of course, 1 megawatt of solar is very cheap, but I think as most of the folks in this call know, it does not provide the same reliability standard. So if you were to, replace a combined cycle with an equivalent reliability, asset that is comprised of solar and storage that becomes very expensive on a kind of dollar per ton abated basis. So one more point on nuclear. We certainly have strong, existing nuclear, of course, makes all the sense in the world to keep online. As we look at new nuclear, it's very expensive to build nuclear, and so our dollar per ton is very high for new nuclear, and the low end of our range represents kind of the potential for small modular reactors as we see those, coming out towards the end of the decade, with the potential to really bring that cost down and may become economic as that technology becomes commercialized. So some more to come there. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's an overview of our efforts to date. Now I want to talk a little bit about where we're spending our time and our money, and which projects that we're actually working on. So as I mentioned, we've been really focusing our efforts recently on carbon capture. So we do have 2 pilot projects focused on carbon capture. Let me start with the lower one, Blue Planet. The Blue Planet's a little bit different technology in that it is a the end product is a mineralized carbon. It's not actually gaseous carbon, so it's a mineralized carbon. It's used to produce a lightweight aggregate that can be used for building both like construction buildings or for parking lots, and it's currently being tested in a parking lot at the San Francisco airport facility. So that project will produce about 5 tons per day and is scheduled to go online this year. We kicked that project off probably roughly 5 years ago. The second project, which is both at the same site, both of these sites are at our Los Medanos facility in Pittsburgh, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our second project at that site is with Ion Clean Energy. And so this project is partially funded by the DOE, and with a goal of capturing about 90% or greater than 90% of the carbon dioxide emissions from a slipstream that will be feeding to the system, with the goal of really reducing costs of this carbon capture technology to hopefully, with a target getting lower than $50 per ton of capture. This project is breaking ground this year, and I think we'll have it online hopefully sometime next year. Next slide, please. And so as we get to some of our, kind of our bigger projects, so I covered pilot projects and actually, steel on the ground that we're working on today. We've also kicked off a couple of FEED studies. So let me take it just a step back really quick. I forgot to note on an earlier slide that, of the 37 combined cycles that we have in the fleet, we did a really rigorous screening study for sites that have access to adjacent land, sites that have, to install carbon capture equipment, sites that have favorable geology nearby, and sites that have a relatively high capacity factor that would make sense to invest, in reducing carbon at those sites. And we came up with 11 sites that we believe to be really good candidates or low-hanging fruit for carbon capture. Those 11 sites tend to be some of our larger sites, and they emitted roughly 20 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2020. And just for perspective, that's about half of our total emissions as a company. So we believe by deploying carbon capture at about 11 of these sites, we can capture about half of the carbon dioxide that we emit on an annual basis. So make a really big impact, with a relatively small number of plants. Of those 11 sites, we're currently actively working on 5. So I showed you a pilot project at one of our sites, and then I'm going to talk about FEED studies at a couple other sites. So the largest plant in our fleet is what I have on the screen now. It's our Deer Park Energy Center in the Houston area in Texas. It's about a 1,200 megawatt cogeneration facility. In addition to producing 1,200 megawatts from 5 combustion turbines, we also produce more than 2 million pounds per hour of steam that we send to our site host, which happens to be Shell Chemical. We are currently working on a FEED study here, partially funded by DOE, to capture about 5 million metric tons per year of carbon dioxide from this asset. And looking to capture about we'll capture not 5 million tons, which happens to be about 95% of the annual CO2 emissions. That study will be partnered. We are partnering with our technology partner, which is Shell CANSOLV technology, an amine-based carbon capture technology. And I've got a site layout there at the bottom. Simultaneously, Shell is also working on a FEED study to capture some emissions on their side of the fence. So we're hoping that we can kind of get together and find some economies of scale with 2 capture projects at a single site. This will be two trains of 2 absorbers, 2 strippers, in this post-combustion capture system. Okay, next slide, please. In addition, another DOE partially funded study is with our Delta Energy Center. It's actually also in Pittsburgh, California. I think it's about a mile or two from Los Medanos, where we have the pilot projects. And this facility is a lot like many of our other facilities. So one of our reasons for picking this facility is really the learning capability, right? So as we design a system to capture carbon at Delta, we believe we can leverage those learnings to capture in many of our other sites that are merchant combined cycles that may look a lot like this, that are similar size, either 2x1 or 3x1. So this particular facility is a 3x1, about 850 megawatts. I said located in the San Francisco Bay Area, participates in the CAISO market. 3 gas turbines, 1 steam turbine, and produces about 2.5 million metric tons per year of carbon dioxide. Our water source is the Delta Diablo Sanitation District using recycled and gray water, and also we do get some water from the canal there. This one will also be a 2-train system, and we're looking to capture 95% of the site emissions here as well. Our technology partner is Ion Clean Energy, so the same company that we're working with at Los Medanos in the pilot project, we're looking to deploy their technology at commercial scale here at Delta. And I think that might have been my last slide. Yep, that was it. So back to you, Dale, thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let me just ask you we have 2 quick clarifying questions for you. And I know everybody's going to want a copy of that slide where you had like the cost curve of all the different options. So thank you for making that. But on that, when you said the 30% by hydrogen mixture, is that 30% by heat input, or could you just explain a little bit more what that is?
That's a really good point. So 30% by volume. So the OEMs tend to quote by volume, right? And so 30% by volume is actually about 11% by heat input, which also translates to 11% by carbon reduction. So although it may sound exciting that we can get to 30%, that's really an 11% carbon dioxide reduction, which means we have a long way to go in terms of burning hydrogen to get to substantive carbon reductions.
Okay, great. That's important to know. Then on the nuclear piece, is that range fusion or the small modular reactors? Like what's in your nuclear, the piece of your
the high end is today's commercial technology of fission technology. The low end is the small modular reactors, and the costs were produced by BCG, to be quite honest. So I don't have all the details behind that range, but it was intended to be today's commercial technology at the high end versus kind of aspirational technology for SMRs as we get to the early 2030s.
Okay, great. So I want to bring Nick and Lynn back so we can have more of a discussion, but you guys can relax because I still have a couple of other clarifying questions for Jeff and Damien. So, and everyone, please use the Q&A. Franz and our team are digesting the questions, so we'll try to get to everything, but don't forget to use that feature. But let me just go back to the clarifying. Jeff, there were a couple of questions for you about nitrogen emissions from burning the hydrogen. How are you thinking about non-carbon emissions and controlling them?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Dale. And it's a fair question. It's a good point. There are higher NOx emissions. I think some of the other panelists could weigh in here too. And this is something that EPA talked about in the white paper, right? And so we're managing against a number of different environmental policies and criteria pollutants here. So I can tell you this is something that the manufacturers are well aware of and that they're working on to try to reduce. And so, yes, it is something that we're managing too. We're aware of the criteria pollutants and NOx emissions associated with hydrogen. Tremendous greenhouse gas and carbon dioxide reduction benefits, though, that really cannot be forgotten in this conversation. So there are trade-offs with everything. There are trade-offs with every technology. I think if we had a conversation about storage, we'd talk about the trade-offs there. And so that is something we're aware of and that we're working on.
Okay, fair enough. And on the hydrogen, you said that you guys are already procuring like hydrogen capable turbines. So what's, can you just tell us, are you able to tell us what's the cost differential for that? and how
So
that's
what
going?
we're doing, Dale, just to be clear, is that we have plans that we have approved in the Upper Midwest, and we have a settlement that's under review by the Commission in Colorado that would have hydrogen capable new combustion turbines or ICE engines as part of the resource plan. And so we have to follow state resource planning guidelines, right? And they're different in each state. So in Colorado, it'll be an open source solicitation where we'll look to seek both hydrogen capable and non-hydrogen turbines. In Minnesota, we proposed 2 new gas combustion turbines, one in Lyon County, Minnesota, and one in North Dakota. Again, we'll go through certificate of need process and procurement processes there. So we're not quite to that step. That's referred to as phase 2 in regulatory proceedings. We've gone through phase 1, but really we're looking at hydrogen capability at all of our gas resources. And if you think about a dual fuel utility, one that both maintains a gas distribution company and power, we can think about the gas distribution system as a storage mechanism, right? When we're making hydrogen, blue or green, and don't need it for power production, it could be injected into the gas distribution system. And we're also looking there at what is the blend wall? What can current appliances blend and burn at the burner tip? And what can different compositions of pipe effectively and safely transport in terms of hydrogen? So I can tell you the price that we think is needed to really scale the technology, and that's $1 to $2 a kilogram that I talked about. And it probably is going to take a layering of hydrogen hub funding, a PTC, significantly reducing the cost of electrolyzers to really bring that technology to scale.
Okay, great. We will probably want to dive into that even a little bit more, but let me get the clarifying question for Damien as well, because one of our main goals here is to make sure everybody understands what you guys are telling them about the state of the technology. And that is, Damien, can you tell us the sort of the time frame for the projects that you went through? Like, are they, where are they in process? Have they broken ground? And when, if you know, might some of them be completed and operational? So we'll get that next layer of info.
Yeah, so we're looking at FID, final investment decision, in the third quarter of 2023, and COD in the second or third quarter of 2026 across all 3 of those projects. Okay. COD being commercial operation date.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. The war on acronyms.
So yeah, and the Whitetail project has completed its pre-feed. It's moving into feed. We've released preliminary RFQs for feeds on the other 2 projects in the US, one in Decatur, as well as the one on the Southern Ute Indian Reservation.
Okay. So I have a few more technology specific questions, and I'll fold them in as we get into the conversation, but I want to pull Nick and Lynn back into the conversation and think about, like, now you've heard all of this, and I think we're all thinking, how do what we know about these technologies and where they are in their stage of development and deployment, how does that fit into meeting the goals that the administration has for carbon reduction and the goals that states have? And, as you guys have all said, companies themselves have emission reduction goals, but you guys have to actually write rules. So Nick, maybe I'll start with you and asking, how do you think about, when you're in the rulemaking process, what can you guys be doing to pull these technologies in and maybe also protect against, the uncertainties that are related to the technologies, or even when you have the technology plus gas, sort of the worst case scenarios in terms of continued use of gas as is, if the technologies don't come to market or scale on the time frame that we're imagining?
Well, first of all, I'll say it's very exciting to hear about all the things that are going on, and there's really great stuff. I think that one thing about the 111 statute is that I think I mentioned this, that we do have an obligation that every 8 years we do an assessment of the NSPS. So in that way, there's sort of this built-in requirement that we evaluate the status of technologies periodically and adjust the standards accordingly. But I mean, we're really interested at this point in what is the state of technologies now, what is the performance, and what is the cost. So information that along those lines helps us now, but we do have the opportunity later to do a reassessment as the technologies develop. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
yeah, well, that keeps the conversation moving. But so now that we're on that point, James, let me ask you. I mean, for CCS, I think you actually said it's ready to go. So is it ready to go? I mean, would you characterize it as, deployable or still under development?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very close to deployable. I put it right at the edge of commercially ready. I mean, what we're missing is the economics, right? We haven't quite found the missing money at this point. So a $50 45Q, for example, is not enough right now to get it done. You saw my range of costs in our preliminary studies of 80 to 160, I think I had per ton, right? So at this point, we need additional incentives, customer demand, other ways to kind of close the missing money, cost reductions. To close the missing money gap. But in terms of the technology readiness and the ability to work, it's there.
So one of the
please.
The points that I should have made earlier, and I just thought of it as James was talking, is that the standards that we develop, EPA develops, the New Source Performance Standards, are meant to be nationally applicable standards, and so. That it's conceivably, that a standard could be met by a facility being built most any place in the U.S. And so one of the things that we're pretty mindful of with regard to CCUS or hydrogen is, there are certain places in the U.S. that are much more geologically favorable for CO2 storage. There are parts of the country that have some existing hydrogen infrastructure right now. Other places don't have that, and so that's another part of what we have to look at is how nationally applicable the technology is. But with that being said, the NSPS serves as sort of a floor for the standard, and then each facility then of course goes through an additional round of permitting. Where there's a analysis looking at the best available control technology for that facility, and in those cases, you take a harder look at whether things like CCUS or hydrogen are applicable at that source.
Mm-hmm. Lynn, I think you're on mute, but I see you're saying something. Perhaps you can speak to the missing money. I'll give you a second if you, let's see. Oh, look, that looks, there was just a check mark next here. I'm still not hearing you. Oh, wait, there you go. No. Sorry, we're still not hearing you. We're still not hearing you, Lynn. All right. When you think you might be audible, just start talking and we'll pull you in. Oh, sorry. I keep hearing almost her. Oh, there she goes.
Okay. So sorry.
You're on
everything. Okay.
Not at all.
A few points. So regarding the technical feasibility, absolutely agree with what Jeff said. And it's really interesting because I purposely didn't talk about any of our carbon capture projects today because I have over 100 in the portfolio actively. And fortunately, Jeff mentioned 3 that we're funding for him, with him. And then we also heard that Damien mentioned 1 that we're funding on hydrogen for him. So I definitely think the technology is there, but I think it goes back to my earlier point that really we need these large scale demonstrations, and Jeff mentioned this too, to really get to the good cost. We have cost predictions, but we really don't have enough, and we certainly haven't moved down the cost curve based on learning by doing. So these projects that we're getting under infrastructure are hugely and critically important. So I think that's super exciting. I also need to bring up though what Damian said. Now, Damien, I'm going to correct you because I think I heard you say that there's only one permitted Class 6 permit. That's actually not true. There's the Red Zero Energy plant in North Dakota has one. There's also a Class 6 permit for the Tundra operation. ADM has one. There's several that were from the Cool First. So I think we have like 6 or 7 currently right now. However, the point is very well taken. If you think about everything we're trying to do to get wide scale deployment, if you just look at Calpine and what Calpine's talking about, right? We have hydrogen hubs. If it's blue hydrogen, it needs storage Class 6. If it's CCS, integrated CCS, it needs storage Class 6. But more importantly, and what we all need to be paying attention to, is the thing called DAC, right? Direct air capture. So I didn't talk about this in my presentation, but under the infrastructure bill, there's $3.5 billion to develop direct air capture. And direct air capture, because it needs to have secure geological storage, it also is going to require Class 6 permitting. So I think really, technically, the challenge is, and we heard Nick talk about, there's only certain geological sites that make sense, but the key is there's going to be a lot of competition for those sites, and we're already seeing it. Thanks.
Great. We just have a few more minutes. Jeff and others should also pipe in discussion on this question. You talked a lot about very low capacity factors for natural gas units. How do you think about, and I'm curious also, Nick and others, what does that mean in terms of the economics? What does that mean in terms of rules? That might be what you're planning, but if we want to kind of model that to see if we're really going to meet our targets nationally or at the state level, how do you lock that in? And is that something that's possible to do in rulemaking or in the way that we set standards, either at the federal or the state level?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dale. Maybe one that requires more than two minutes to try to solve. But what I can tell you is that when we look at our portfolios without new gas, costs go up and reliability is a concern. And so those units are playing a very critical function in a resource plan that's going to an 80% renewable future. So to constrain them is to bring those things into question. I see that there was a question in the chat from Ben, and those are specifically CTs and ICE engines, not combined cycle. We're not proposing to build new combined cycle in these plans. And so they serve a really critical function. I think what you're getting to, though, is around environmental regulation and how do you think about that? And Nick alluded to, and I talked a bit about perhaps some subcategorization. We need to be really, really aware, though, of the critical reliability function that those units will play. And I think we've all read enough lately about the reliability needs of the grid. So that's what our modeling shows. And I think, again, it's in the absence of something else that's completely carbon free, right? And so we have that dispatchable need right now. And while we're pulling those new technologies into the market, whether that's carbon capture or hydrogen, or some sort of seasonal storage, and we didn't really talk much about it, plays a really critical technology need. And so perhaps that's through the 2020s and 2030s as we're developing the R&D that Lynn talked about for a portfolio of options, but they serve a vital role. And I think thinking about that and perhaps some reliability relief valve, if you will, in any regulation would be really, really important.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a whole nother session to talk about that and drill down on it and get the rest of the questions. Sorry, there were just way too many, but it's great to see this level of interest. And thanks again. I'm going to turn it over to Doug to close us out.
Thanks, Dale, and thanks to all the panelists. What a great discussion. And I think you're right. I think we need to do part 2 of this discussion. So thanks. And thanks to all of you for joining us. There was a question about the recording, and all the registrants to this will get a link to the recording of this. and obviously to the slides then as well. So we really thank everybody for being part of this. Thanks so much to our fantastic panelists. Dale, thanks for doing a great job working through all of the questions there. We really appreciate it. And if you have other suggestions for any of us as to other topics that are of interest to you, let us know. We're happy to do it. Thanks very much. Take care and have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.